The blood-curdling scream echoed across the prairie as Willa Reed stood frozen, watching flames consume the modest farmhouse that had been her home for all her 19 years. April 1876 would forever be burned into her memory as the night she lost everything in the untamed territory of Wyoming. The cool night air carried the acrid smell of smoke as Willa stumbled backward, her legs nearly giving way beneath her. She had only been gone for an hour, riding to the neighboring farm to return a pie dish her mother had borrowed. If she had stayed home, she would have perished alongside them, her parents and her younger brother. From her hiding place behind a large boulder, she watched through tear-filled eyes as 5 riders circled the burning building, their silhouettes menacing against the orange glow. Their laughter carried across the open space, making her stomach turn. They had done this deliberately. This was no accident. "Make sure none of them got out," shouted one of the men, his voice gruff and commanding. "Caldwell wants all of them dead." Willa pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a sob. Caldwell. Victor Caldwell. The cattle baron who had been pressuring her father to sell their land for months. Her father had refused, standing firm on the small but fertile plot of land that had been in the Reed family for 2 generations. The sound of hoofbeats faded as the riders departed, apparently satisfied with their night's work. Willa remained hidden until dawn, her body numb with cold and grief. When the first rays of sunlight touched the charred remains of her home, she finally approached, her steps unsteady. There was nothing left, nothing but ash, blackened timber, and memories that would haunt her forever. She fell to her knees among the ruins, her throat raw from holding back screams. "I'll find them," she whispered to the wind. "I swear I'll find them all." Shoshone, Wyoming was a small town nestled in the shadow of the mountains, a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Willa had always loved its familiarity, the way the townspeople looked out for one another. Now, as she rode her mare slowly down the main street, she felt like a stranger. Sheriff Tom Wilkins looked up from his desk as Willa entered the small jailhouse. His weather-beaten face registered surprise, then sympathy. "Miss Reed," he said, rising to his feet, "I heard about what happened. I'm mighty sorry for your loss." "I know who did it," Willa said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "It was Caldwell's men." The sheriff's expression changed subtly. He cleared his throat. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Reed. Victor Caldwell is a powerful man in these parts. I heard them say his name. They made sure my family was inside before they set the fire." Sheriff Wilkins sighed, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. "I'll look into it, but without evidence or witnesses." "I'm a witness," Willa insisted, her hands clenched at her sides. "Your word against his won't be enough," the sheriff said gently. "Mr. Caldwell employs half the town. People depend on him for their livelihood. And that makes it acceptable for him to murder my family." Willa's voice rose, drawing the attention of a tall figure leaning against the wall near the door. "Nothing makes murder acceptable," the man said, pushing himself away from the wall and stepping into the light. Willa turned, noticing him for the first time. He was lean but broad-shouldered, with dark hair that brushed his collar and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. He wore a dusty duster coat, well-worn boots, and a gun belt that looked as much a part of him as his own skin. "This doesn't concern you, Lawson," the sheriff said with a hint of annoyance. "Maybe it should," the man Lawson replied, his gaze never leaving Willa's face. "If Caldwell's men are burning folks out of their homes, that concerns everyone." Sheriff Wilkins shook his head. "Lawson Drake, always ready to tilt at windmills. Miss Reed doesn't need your kind of help. She needs to let the law handle this." "Like you're handling it now?" Willa asked bitterly. "By telling me there's nothing to be done," the sheriff's face reddened. "I said I'd look into it, and I will. But I won't make promises I can't keep." Willa stared at him for a long moment before turning away. "Then I'll find justice myself." She strode out of the jailhouse, blinking back tears of frustration. The bright sunshine seemed to mock her grief, the ordinary bustle of the town a stark contrast to the chaos of her life. "Miss Reed," a voice called from behind her. She turned to see Lawson Drake following her into the street. "A word, if you don't mind." "I don't need your pity, Mr. Drake," she said, continuing toward her horse. "Good, because I'm not offering any." His long strides easily kept pace with hers. "I'm offering something else." Willa stopped and faced him, her patience worn thin. "And what might that be?" "Help," he said simply. "The kind that might actually get you what you're looking for." Willa studied him, noting the hard set of his jaw and the lines around his eyes that spoke of experiences beyond his years, which she guessed to be late 20s. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." A shadow crossed his face. "Let's just say I understand what it's like to want justice when no one else seems willing to deliver it." For the first time since the fire, Willa felt a flicker of hope. "What do you propose, Mr. Drake? First, we get you somewhere safe." Caldwell's men might come looking if they realized there was a survivor. His eyes scanned the street as if expecting danger to materialize at any moment. "Then we gather evidence. Real evidence that even Sheriff Wilkins can't ignore. And if that doesn't work?" Willa asked, already knowing the answer. Lawson's expression hardened. "Then we find another way." The small cabin sat nestled against a hillside, half a day's ride from Shoshone. It was simple but solid, with a small corral for horses and a creek running nearby. Willa dismounted, her body aching from the journey. "It's not much," Lawson said, taking the reins of her horse, "but it's secluded. No one will look for you here." "Is this your home?" Willa asked, taking in the modest surroundings. "One of them," he replied cryptically. "I move around a lot." Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished but clean. A wooden table and chairs, a small stove, shelves stocked with essentials, and a narrow bed in the corner. Willa stood awkwardly in the center of the room, suddenly aware of her situation alone in a remote cabin with a man she'd just met. As if reading her thoughts, Lawson said, "I'll be sleeping in the lean-to out back. You'll have your privacy." Willa nodded, grateful but uncertain. "Mr. Drake, I appreciate your help, but I still don't understand why you're doing this." Lawson busied himself lighting the stove. "Caldwell and I have history," he said after a pause. "Bad history." "What kind of history?" He straightened, his face guarded. "The kind that's best left in the past for now. What matters is that I know how he operates and I can help you prove what he did to your family." Willa sank into one of the wooden chairs, the events of the past 24 hours finally catching up with her. "My family." Her voice broke. "They didn't deserve this." Lawson sat across from her, his expression softening. "Tell me about them," and so she did. She told him about her father, Jonathan Reed, a stubborn but fair man who had built their farm from nothing. About her mother, Sarah, whose garden was the pride of the county. About her 16-year-old brother, David, who dreamed of becoming a doctor someday. She spoke until her voice grew hoarse, painting a picture of the life that had been violently torn from her. Lawson listened without interruption, his eyes reflecting a pain that matched her own. When she finally fell silent, he reached across the table and briefly touched her hand. "Get some rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow we start gathering what we need to bring Caldwell down." As darkness fell, Willa lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep eluded her as images of the burning farmhouse played in her mind. From outside came the soft sounds of Lawson moving around, checking on the horses, securing the perimeter of the small property. Despite everything, she felt oddly safe knowing he was there, but safety was an illusion in a world where men like Victor Caldwell could destroy lives with impunity. As she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, Willa made a silent vow that she would not rest until justice was served one way or another. The next morning brought a clarity that had been missing in the haze of grief. Willa awakened to the smell of coffee and found Lawson already up, cooking a simple breakfast of beans and bacon. "I hope you slept," he said without turning around. "Some," she admitted, splashing water on her face from a basin by the door. "What's the plan for today?" Lawson handed her a tin cup of strong coffee. "We need information. Names, places, proof that links Caldwell to what happened at your farm. And how do we get that? I know someone in town who might be willing to talk, one of Caldwell's former men who left on bad terms. If anyone knows the details of what happened that night, it would be him." They rode back toward Shoshone, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen. Lawson led them to a small, dilapidated cabin on the outskirts of town, where a gray-haired man with a pronounced limp greeted them warily. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon, Drake," the man said, his rheumy eyes shifting to Willa. "Who's the girl?" "This is Miss Reed," Lawson replied. "Her family's farm was burned 3 nights ago. Everyone inside was killed." The old man's eyes widened. "The Reed place out by Crooked Creek." Willa nodded, studying him carefully. "Did you know my family?" "Knew of them," the man said, gesturing for them to enter his humble dwelling. "Name's Harvey Daniels. Used to ride for Caldwell until my leg got busted and he tossed me aside like yesterday's trash." Inside, Harvey poured them each a shot of whiskey. Willa declined, but Lawson accepted with a nod of thanks. "We need to know if Caldwell ordered the hit on the Reed farm," Lawson said, getting straight to the point. Harvey took a long swallow of his drink, his gaze darting between them. "Asking that kind of question could get a man killed." "My family is already dead," Willa said quietly. "I need to know who gave the order." The old man sighed heavily. "Caldwell's been eyeing that land for years. Good water access, perfect for expanding his operation. Word is he's planning something big a deal with the railroad, maybe." "But did he order the attack?" Lawson pressed. Harvey nodded slowly. "He wouldn't have done it himself, but yeah, the order would have come from him, probably through his foreman, Silas Jenkins." Willa leaned forward. "Do you know who carried it out? Who actually set the fire?" "Can't say for certain, but Caldwell has a group of men he uses for his dirty work. Brothers named Cole, Dwayne, and Eddie. Then there's a Mexican fella they call Viper, and 2 others, Frank Wilson and Blake Thompson. Mean as snakes, all of them." Lawson's expression darkened. "I know Thompson. He's got a distinctive scar across his right cheek." "That's him," Harvey confirmed. "Got it in a knife fight in Laramie." Willa committed the names to memory, each one a step closer to justice. "Is there any way to prove they were involved? Something that would convince the sheriff to act?" Harvey scratched his stubbled chin. "Might be. Caldwell keeps records of payments in a ledger. Man's meticulous about his money. If he paid those boys extra for the job, it would be in there." "Where would he keep this ledger?" Lawson asked. "In his office at the ranch house, locked in a safe behind a painting of his late wife." Lawson exchanged a glance with Willa. "Getting to that safe won't be easy." "Never said it would be," Harvey replied with a sardonic smile. "But if you're serious about bringing Caldwell down, that ledger's your best chance." They left Harvey's cabin with a clearer plan but more dangerous prospects ahead. As they rode away from town, Willa broke the silence that had fallen between them. "You're thinking of breaking into Caldwell's ranch." It wasn't a question, and Lawson didn't treat it as one. "It's our best option for getting proof." Willa raised an eyebrow. "I'm coming with you." Lawson reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her. "No, you're not. It's too dangerous. This is my fight, Mr. Drake. My family that was murdered. I won't sit safely in your cabin while you risk your life." The intensity in her green eyes matched the determination in her voice, and after a moment, Lawson nodded reluctantly. "We'll need to plan carefully," he said. "Caldwell's ranch is well guarded, especially his house." "Then we'd better start planning," Willa replied, urging her horse forward again. As they rode, Lawson studied her profile against the backdrop of the Wyoming landscape. Her delicate features belied the strength he'd witnessed since meeting her. In the short time he'd known Willa Reed, he'd seen her grief, her rage, and her resilience. What he hadn't seen was fear, even when fear would have been justified. It stirred something in him, something he thought had died years ago along with his own family. A feeling of admiration, respect, and something deeper that he wasn't ready to name. For her part, Willa was equally aware of the man riding beside her. Lawson Drake was an enigma, dangerous yet principled, hardened yet capable of kindness. He'd taken up her cause without hesitation, offering not just help but understanding. In the midst of her loss, his presence was an unexpected anchor, keeping her from being swept away by the currents of her grief and rage. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Lawson sketched out the layout of Caldwell's ranch from memory, marking guard positions and potential entry points. He taught Willa how to handle his spare revolver, impressed by her natural steadiness and aim. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12, she explained as she hit a row of cans set up behind the cabin. Said a woman alone on the frontier needed to know how to protect herself." Lawson nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. He was a wise man. Yes, Willa said softly, lowering the gun. He was. The plan they devised was simple but risky. They would wait for the next big cattle shipment when many of Caldwell's men would be occupied with the drive. Lawson would create a distraction by setting fire to one of the outer buildings, drawing the remaining guards away from the main house. Willa, smaller and lighter, would slip in through an upstairs window, make her way to Caldwell's office, and retrieve the ledger. "What if Caldwell himself is there?" Willa asked as they reviewed the plan one final time. "He always goes into town on shipping days," Lawson assured her, "likes to celebrate at the saloon afterward." On the night chosen for their mission, they rode to within a mile of Caldwell's ranch and continued on foot. The moon was a silver sliver in the sky, providing just enough light to see by without fully exposing them. In the distance, the sprawling ranch house stood as a symbol of Caldwell's power and influence. "Remember," Lawson whispered as they crouched behind a stand of trees at the edge of the property, "if anything goes wrong, we meet back at the horses. Don't wait for me, just go." Willa nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She was dressed in dark clothes borrowed from Lawson, her hair tucked under a cap, the revolver secure in a holster at her hip. "Be careful," she said, meeting his intense gaze. "You too," he replied, giving her shoulder a brief squeeze before moving away toward the stables. Willa counted to 500 as planned, giving Lawson time to get into position. Just as she reached the final numbers, a bright orange glow erupted from the direction of the hay barn. Shouts and running footsteps followed as the ranch hands scrambled to contain the blaze. Taking advantage of the chaos, Willa darted across the open ground to the side of the main house. A trellis covered in climbing roses provided the access they'd planned for, and she began to climb, ignoring the thorns that tore at her hands. The upstairs window was unlocked, just as Lawson had predicted. Caldwell's wife had apparently enjoyed the night air, and after her death, no one had changed her habit of leaving the window ajar. Willa slipped inside, finding herself in what must have been Mrs. Caldwell's sitting room, preserved like a shrine. Moving silently, she made her way down the hallway to the stairs. The house was eerily quiet, all attention focused on the fire outside. She descended to the first floor and found Caldwell's office exactly where Lawson had described a large room at the back of the house with windows overlooking the corral. The painting of Mrs. Caldwell hung prominently behind the massive oak desk. Willa carefully lifted it from its hooks, revealing a small iron safe built into the wall. Her heart sank at the sight of the combination lock. "Turn it to 24, then right to 51, then left to 16, a voice whispered from the doorway. Willa spun around, her hand flying to her gun, but relaxed when she saw Lawson. "How did you?" Harvey knew the combination. "I forgot to tell you." He moved to stand beside her. "Hurry, the fire won't keep them occupied much longer." Willa turned the dial as instructed, and with a satisfying click, the safe door swung open. Inside were stacks of papers, bags of coins, and several leather-bound books. She grabbed the largest ledger and flipped it open, scanning the pages quickly. "Here," she said, pointing to an entry dated 3 days before the fire at her farm. "Payment to Dwayne and Eddie Cole, Frank Wilson, Miguel Viper Vasquez, and Blake Thompson, $500 each for special services." Lawson leaned closer to read the entry, his breath warm against her cheek. "That's it, that's our proof." A floorboard creaked in the hallway. They both froze, eyes locked on the door. Footsteps approached, then paused outside the office. "Take the ledger and go back the way we came," Lawson whispered urgently. "I'll handle this." "I'm not leaving you," Willa insisted. The door handle began to turn. In one swift motion, Lawson pushed Willa behind the desk and drew his gun. The door opened to reveal a startled ranch hand, his own hand moving toward his holster. Lawson fired first, the shot catching the man in the shoulder. He stumbled backward with a cry of pain. Lawson grabbed Willa's arm, pulling her toward the window. "Go now," he urged, breaking the glass with the butt of his gun. Willa clutched the ledger to her chest and climbed through the window, Lawson right behind her. They ran across the yard, the alarm now raised as shouts rang out behind them. "Stop them!" someone yelled, followed by the crack of gunfire. They reached the cover of the trees, bullets splintering bark around them. Lawson stumbled once but kept moving, urging Willa ahead of him. They found their horses where they'd left them, quickly mounted and galloped away into the darkness. They didn't slow until they were miles from Caldwell's ranch, the sounds of pursuit long faded. Only then did Willa notice the dark stain spreading across Lawson's side. "You're hit," she gasped, reining her horse alongside his. Lawson pressed a hand to his side, his face pale in the moonlight. "It's nothing. Bullet just grazed me. We need to stop and tend to it." "Not yet. We need more distance." They rode for another hour before Lawson finally conceded to stopping at a small stream. Willa helped him from his horse and eased him down against a tree trunk. The ledger, secured in her saddlebag, represented their hard-won evidence, but at that moment, all her concern was for the man who had risked his life to help her. She gently removed his coat and lifted his blood-soaked shirt. The wound was a deep furrow along his ribs, still bleeding steadily. "This is more than a graze," she said, tearing strips from her petticoat to use as bandages. "I've had worse," Lawson replied, his voice strained. Willa cleaned the wound as best she could with water from the stream, then bound it tightly. Throughout her ministrations, Lawson watched her face, illuminated by the weak moonlight, her expression concentrated and determined. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, noticing his gaze. "I'm trying to figure you out, Willa Reed," he said softly. "Most women would be falling apart after everything you've been through." "I don't have the luxury of falling apart," she replied, securing the bandage. "Not until this is finished." Lawson caught her hand as she pulled away. "Thank you." The simple words carried a weight of meaning that hung in the air between them. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, connected by shared purpose and something deeper neither was ready to acknowledge. Willa was the first to break the spell, gently withdrawing her hand. "We should keep moving. Dawn isn't far off." They rode through the remainder of the night, reaching Lawson's cabin as the first light of day touched the eastern horizon. Exhausted and sore, they tended to their horses before finally collapsing inside. "We need to take this to Sheriff Wilkins," Willa said, placing the ledger on the table. "It's clear evidence of Caldwell's involvement." Lawson eased himself onto a chair, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. "Wilkins is a decent man, but he's also practical. Caldwell has a lot of influence." "This is more than influence," Willa argued, opening the ledger to the damning entry. "This is proof of murder." "It's proof of payment for special services," Lawson countered. "A good lawyer could argue that doesn't necessarily mean murder." Willa's shoulders slumped. "Then what was the point of risking our lives for this?" "It's a start," Lawson said, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. "We have names now, we know who to focus on, and one of those men might be willing to talk if properly motivated." "Motivated how?" A grim smile played at the corners of Lawson's mouth. "Fear can be a powerful motivator, especially the fear of facing a murder charge alone." The following day, they rode into Shoshone with the ledger carefully wrapped and hidden in Willa's saddlebag. Despite his injury, Lawson insisted on accompanying her to the sheriff's office. They found Sheriff Wilkins at his desk, a half-eaten breakfast pushed to one side. "Miss Reed," he said, standing as they entered, "and Mr. Drake, to what do I owe this visit?" Willa placed the ledger on his desk. "Evidence, Sheriff, of Victor Caldwell's involvement in the murder of my family." Sheriff Wilkins's expression shifted from surprise to wariness as he looked at the ledger. "Where did you get this?" "That's not important," Lawson replied. "What matters is what's inside." The sheriff opened the book and scanned the pages Willa pointed out. His frown deepened as he read. "This is Caldwell's private ledger," he said, closing the book. "Obtained without his permission, I'm guessing." "My family was murdered," Willa said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Their killers were paid by Caldwell, and it's all recorded right there. Will you act on this evidence or not?" Sheriff Wilkins ran a hand over his face, the conflict evident in his expression. "This is difficult, Miss Reed. Even with this ledger, it's not definitive proof. And Caldwell has friends in the territorial government. So you'll do nothing," Lawson said flatly. "I didn't say that." The sheriff stood, pacing behind his desk. "I can bring in these men for questioning. If one of them confesses, implicates Caldwell directly, then we have something solid." "And if they don't?" Willa asked. Then we keep looking for more evidence, Sheriff Wilkins replied. This is a start, but we need more. Willa and Lawson exchanged a glance, communicating without words their shared frustration and determination. Fine, Lawson said eventually. Bring them in. Question them, but don't let Caldwell know what you're doing, or they'll all have accidents before you can get to them. The sheriff nodded grimly. I'm not a fool, Drake. I know how men like Caldwell operate. As they left the sheriff's office, Willa's frustration boiled over. This isn't enough. Even if he questions them, they won't talk. They're too afraid of Caldwell. Which is why we need to make them more afraid of something else, Lawson said, leading her away from the busy main street to a quiet alley. Sheriff Wilkins will do things his way, and that's fine. But we'll do things our way, too. What are you suggesting? Blake Thompson frequents a saloon on the edge of town. He's usually there alone, likes his privacy. If we could get him alone, make him understand that his only hope of survival is to turn on Caldwell. Willa considered this, weighing the risks against her need for justice. You think he'd talk? Thompson's a coward at heart. He's only brave with Caldwell's protection and when the odds are in his favor. Take that away and he'll crack. That night, they positioned themselves near the Broken Spoke saloon, waiting for Blake Thompson to emerge. The hours dragged by, and Willa found herself studying Lawson's profile in the darkness. There was a hardness to him that spoke of past suffering, but also a code of honor that guided his actions. You never told me why you're so determined to help me bring down Caldwell, she said softly. Lawson was silent for a long moment. 4 years ago, I had a small horse ranch near Laramie. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I'd built it from nothing. He paused, his jaw tightening. Caldwell wanted the land for a new grazing area I refused to sell. A chill ran down Willa's spine. What happened? My wife and son were in the barn when it caught fire. I was in town purchasing supplies. His voice was flat, emotionless, but his eyes reflected a pain that time hadn't dulled. By the time I got back, it was too late. Everyone said it was an accident, but I knew. I just couldn't prove it. Willa reached out, her hand finding his in the darkness. I'm sorry, Lawson. He squeezed her hand briefly before releasing it. Caldwell's been destroying lives for years. It's time someone stopped him. Their conversation was interrupted by the saloon doors swinging open. A man with a distinctive scar across his right cheek staggered out, clearly drunk but still alert enough to check his surroundings before heading down the quiet street. That's him, Lawson whispered, rising from their hiding place. Stay here. No, Willa said firmly, standing alongside him. We do this together. They followed Thompson at a distance, waiting until he turned down a deserted side street before making their move. Lawson stepped out from the shadows, blocking Thompson's path. Evening, Blake, he said casually. Thompson squinted, recognition slowly dawning on his face. Drake, what the hell do you want? Just a conversation. Lawson's voice was calm, but his hand rested near his holster. About the Reed farm. Thompson's hand moved toward his own gun, but Willa stepped out behind him, her revolver already drawn and pressed against his back. I wouldn't, she advised quietly. Thompson froze, trapped between them. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, Willa said, circling around to face him. You and your friends burned my family alive 3 nights ago, on Victor Caldwell's orders. You're crazy, Thompson sputtered, his eyes darting between them. We have proof, Lawson cut in. Caldwell's ledger showing payments to you and the others for special services on the night of the fire. Fear flickered across Thompson's face. That don't prove nothing. Maybe not on its own, Lawson agreed. But Sheriff Wilkins is bringing in your friends for questioning. How long before one of them talks to save their own skin? Thompson swallowed hard. They won't talk. Are you willing to bet your life on that? Willa asked, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. Because that's what you're doing. Murder carries a hanging offense in this territory. Look, Lawson said, his tone almost reasonable, Caldwell's not going to protect you. He'll sacrifice all of you to save himself. But if you're the first to talk, to testify that Caldwell ordered the hit on the Reed farm. I could end up dead either way, Thompson muttered. Not if you're under the sheriff's protection, Willa countered. Not if your testimony puts Caldwell behind bars where he can't hurt anyone else. Thompson's resolve visibly wavered, sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. "It wasn't supposed to be a killing," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "Caldwell just wanted the farm, scare them off," he said, "but then things got out of hand. The Cole brothers, they're animals. They made sure the family was inside before they lit the fire." Willa's hand tightened on her gun, rage threatening to overwhelm her at the casual way he described her family's murder. Lawson stepped closer, his presence steadying her. "You'll tell this to Sheriff Wilkins?" he asked Thompson. The scarred man nodded reluctantly. "But I want protection, written guarantee from the sheriff that I won't hang for this." "That's not for us to promise," Willa said, "but cooperating fully is your best chance." Under the watchful eyes of Willa and Lawson, Thompson was escorted to the jail. Sheriff Wilkins listened to his confession with a grim expression, taking detailed notes and ultimately agreeing to consider leniency in exchange for testimony against Caldwell and the others. By dawn, arrest warrants had been issued for Dwayne and Eddie Cole, Frank Wilson, Miguel Vasquez, and Victor Caldwell himself. Sheriff Wilkins, now fully committed to the case with a confession in hand, organized a posse to bring them in. "You two should lie low," he advised Willa and Lawson. "Caldwell won't go quietly, and he has a lot of men loyal to him." "We've come too far to back off now," Lawson replied. "I'm riding with the posse," Willa nodded in agreement. "So am I," the sheriff knew better than to argue. "Be ready to ride in an hour." As they prepared to leave the jail, Willa touched Lawson's arm. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." His eyes met hers, a wealth of unspoken feelings passing between them. "We're not finished yet." "No," she agreed, "but we're closer than I ever thought we'd be." The posse assembled quickly, a dozen men determined to see justice done, despite Caldwell's influence. They rode out from Shoshone with grim purpose, headed for the sprawling ranch that had been the center of power for too long. Willa rode beside Lawson, her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and dread. This was what she had wanted since the night of the fire, a chance to confront her family's killers, to see justice served. Yet as they approached Caldwell's property, she felt a strange hollowness. Even if they succeeded, even if Caldwell and his men paid for their crimes, it wouldn't bring her family back. As if sensing her thoughts, Lawson glanced over at her. "You all right?" "I will be," she replied, straightening in her saddle, "when this is over." Sheriff Wilkins raised a hand, signaling the posse to halt at the edge of Caldwell's property. "We do this by the book," he announced. "No unnecessary violence. We're here to make lawful arrests, not start a war." The ranch was unusually quiet as they approached. No men working in the corrals, no smoke from the cookhouse chimney. The silence was unsettling. "Something's wrong," Lawson muttered, his hand moving to his gun. They reached the main yard, the posse spread out in a loose formation. Sheriff Wilkins dismounted, approaching the house with caution. "Victor Caldwell," he called out. "This is Sheriff Tom Wilkins. I have warrants for your arrest and the arrest of several of your men. Come out peacefully." No response came from the house. The sheriff signaled for two of his deputies to check the bunkhouse and stables. They returned moments later, shaking their heads. "Empty, Sheriff. Looks like they cleared out in a hurry." Lawson swore under his breath. He knew we were coming. The front door of the house suddenly swung open. Everyone tensed, guns half drawn, but it was only an elderly Mexican woman, the housekeeper. "Senor Caldwell, he is gone," she said, wringing her hands. "Left last night with Senor Jenkins and many men. Took horses, supplies." "Did they say where they were going?" Sheriff Wilkins asked. The woman shook her head. "But they were angry, hurrying. Senor Caldwell, he say something about the border, Mexico." Beyond the reach of territorial law, Willa felt her hopes crumbling. After everything they had risked, after coming so close, Caldwell was escaping justice. "He can't have gotten far," Lawson said, determination hardening his features. "Not with a large group. We can track them." Sheriff Wilkins hesitated, weighing his options. "Crossing into Mexico would be outside my jurisdiction." "Then we stop them before they cross," Lawson insisted. The sheriff looked at the faces of his posse men who had witnessed Caldwell's abuses of power for years, who had finally found the courage to stand against him. Their resolve was clear. "All right," he decided. "We track them, but we do it right. No vigilante justice." They regrouped quickly, gathering information from the ranch hands who remained those not loyal enough to flee with Caldwell. The trail led south, toward the desert expanse that would eventually give way to the Mexican border. The posse rode hard, following tracks that grew fresher as the day progressed. By mid-afternoon, a dust cloud in the distance confirmed they were gaining ground. They're slowed down by wagons, one of the trackers reported, probably carrying Caldwell's valuables. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, they crested a rise and spotted Caldwell's party camped in a narrow valley below. Wagons formed a rough circle, and men moved about setting up camp for the night. "We've got them," Sheriff Wilkins said with satisfaction. "We'll approach from different directions, surround them before they know what's happening." The plan was quickly formed. The posse would split into 3 groups, approaching from different angles as darkness fell. Sheriff Wilkins would call for their surrender, hoping to avoid bloodshed. Willa insisted on staying with Lawson, who was assigned to the eastern approach. As they moved into position, twilight deepening around them, she felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever happened next, she had come further than she dared hope when she stood watching her home burn. "Stay behind me," Lawson whispered as they dismounted and continued on foot, using the brush for cover. "I can take care of myself," she replied, though she appreciated his concern. "I know you can," he said, his eyes meeting hers briefly in the gathering darkness, "but I've lost too much already." "I couldn't bear to lose you too." The simple admission sent warmth spreading through her chest, momentarily displacing the cold determination that had driven her for days. Before she could respond, a signal whistle sounded from across the valley, Sheriff Wilkins making his move. Victor Caldwell. The sheriff's voice boomed across the camp. "You and your men are surrounded. Throw down your weapons and surrender peacefully." Chaos erupted in the camp. Men scrambled for cover, guns drawn. From their position, Willa and Lawson could see Caldwell himself, a tall, imposing figure with a shock of white hair, shouting orders. "You have no authority here, Wilkins," Caldwell called back. "Turn around and go home before my men put bullets in you." The sheriff's response was drowned out by the first shot, though it was impossible to tell which side had fired. In moments, the air was filled with the crack of gunfire, shouts, and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Lawson pulled Willa down behind a large boulder as bullets whistled overhead. "Stay here," he urged. "I need to get closer." "I'm coming with you," she insisted. "Willa, please. I can't focus if I'm worried about you." She wanted to argue but saw the genuine concern in his eyes. With a reluctant nod, she pressed herself against the boulder. "Be careful." Lawson squeezed her hand once before darting from cover to cover, working his way closer to the camp. Willa watched his progress, her heart in her throat each time he exposed himself to potential gunfire. The battle raged around the camp, deputies and posse members exchanging fire with Caldwell's men. Through gaps in the fighting, Willa caught glimpses of familiar faces, the Cole brothers firing from behind a wagon, Frank Wilson reloading near the campfire. Her attention was drawn to Lawson, who had reached the edge of the camp and was moving purposefully toward a large tent that likely belonged to Caldwell. Just as he approached, a figure emerged from the tent, Caldwell himself, a rifle in his hands. Willa's breath caught as Lawson confronted the man responsible for so much suffering. Even from a distance, she could see the recognition on Caldwell's face, followed by a sneer of contempt. They exchanged words she couldn't hear over the gunfire, but their body language told the story. Caldwell raised his rifle, but Lawson was faster, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. Caldwell staggered but remained standing, returning fire as he retreated behind the tent. Unable to stay hidden any longer, Willa moved from her position, keeping low as she made her way toward Lawson. As she approached, she saw him clutching his arm, blood seeping between his fingers. "Lawson," she called, reaching his side. "You're hit again." "It's nothing," he grimaced, his eyes scanning the area. "Caldwell went that way. He's trying to escape." Without hesitation, they moved together in pursuit, skirting the edge of the battle. The gunfire was becoming sporadic now, suggesting one side was gaining the upper hand. Willa prayed it was the sheriff's men. They found Caldwell attempting to mount a horse at the edge of the camp. His white shirt was stained with blood from Lawson's shot, but he moved with desperate energy. "Stop right there, Caldwell," Lawson shouted, his gun trained on the cattle baron. Caldwell turned, hatred etched on his aristocratic features. Drake, he spat. Should have killed you years ago after I took care of your wife and brat. Willa felt Lawson tense beside her, his finger tightening on the trigger. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. Not like this, she said softly. He needs to face justice, real justice. For a moment she thought Lawson might ignore her, might give in to the rage that had fueled him for years. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Victor Caldwell, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion simmering beneath. You're under arrest for the murders of Jonathan, Sarah, and David Reed, and for the murders of Elizabeth and James Drake. Caldwell's hand moved suddenly, reaching for the gun at his hip. Willa reacted instinctively, firing once. Her shot struck him in the shoulder, spinning him away from his horse. He fell to his knees, clutching the wound. It's over, Caldwell, she said, approaching cautiously, her gun still raised. You'll answer for what you've done. Sheriff Wilkins arrived moments later, taking in the scene with a nod of approval. Good work, both of you, he said, signaling for his deputies to secure Caldwell. The fighting's mostly done. Most of his men surrendered when they saw they were outmatched. Willa watched as Caldwell was handcuffed and led away, his once proud bearing diminished by defeat and pain. She had imagined this moment countless times since the night of the fire, expected to feel triumph or at least satisfaction. Instead, she felt only a profound weariness and the first fragile tendrils of peace. Lawson stood beside her, his own expression reflecting similar emotions. It's done, he said quietly. Yes, she agreed, turning to examine his wounded arm. Now let's get you patched up again. He smiled faintly at that, allowing her to lead him back toward the sheriff's group. As they walked, his uninjured arm slipped around her waist, a gesture of comfort and connection that felt entirely natural. The days that followed brought a flurry of activity to Shoshone. Caldwell and his men were held in the jail, awaiting trial for multiple murders and other crimes. Blake Thompson's testimony, combined with the ledger and confessions from some of Caldwell's other men, ensured that justice would be served. Willa found herself staying at the town's small hotel, uncertain of her next steps. The Reed farm was gone, her family with it. She had achieved the justice she sought, but the future stretched before her, unplanned and unknown. Lawson visited her daily, his own wounds healing well. They spoke of many things, their shared grief, their hopes, their memories both painful and precious. In his company, Willa found unexpected solace and the gradual awakening of feelings she had thought impossible after such loss. One evening, as they sat on the hotel's small balcony watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant hues, Lawson took her hand in his. I've been thinking, he said, his usual confidence tinged with uncertainty. About what comes next, for you, Willa asked, or for me? For both of us, if you're willing. He turned to face her fully. I have land near the mountains, good land with a creek running through it. I purchased it last year but never built on it. I've been too focused on Caldwell to think about the future. Willa's heart quickened at the direction of his words. And now I'm thinking about building something, a home, a life. He paused, his blue eyes searching hers. But I don't want to build it alone. She didn't look away, didn't hide the emotions his words stirred in her. Are you asking me to come with you, Lawson Drake? I'm asking for more than that, he said softly. I know it's soon, too soon maybe, but life out here is uncertain, and I've learned that when you find something worth holding on to, you shouldn't wait. Something. Willa raised an eyebrow, a smile playing at her lips despite the seriousness of the moment. Someone, he corrected, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. You, Willa. From the moment you walked into that sheriff's office, determined to find justice despite the odds, you awakened something in me I thought had died with my family. Hope, purpose, and eventually love. The word hung between them, powerful and transformative. Willa felt tears gathering in her eyes, not of grief this time, but of something brighter. I never expected to find you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. In the midst of all that darkness, you were the light that guided me through, the strength that held me up when I might have fallen. Lawson reached out, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. Is that a yes? Instead of answering with words, Willa leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with shared longing and promise. When they finally parted, both breathing a little faster, she rested her forehead against his. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to building a home, yes to building a life, yes to everything with you." The trial of Victor Caldwell and his men took place a month later. Willa and Lawson testified together, their united front and compelling evidence leaving little doubt of the defendant's guilt. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Judge Harrison, a stern man with a reputation for fairness, sentenced Caldwell and the Cole brothers to hang for their multiple murders. The others received lengthy prison terms for their roles in the crimes. As Caldwell was led from the courtroom, he stopped before Willa and Lawson. "You think this is justice?" he sneered. "You've taken everything from me." "No," Willa replied calmly. "Justice would be bringing back the people you murdered. This is merely the consequence of your actions, nothing more." Lawson squeezed her hand as Caldwell was led away, the cattle baron's power and influence now nothing but memory. Outside the courthouse, Sheriff Wilkins approached them. "You two did good work," he said, extending his hand to Lawson. "The territory's a safer place because of you." "Just doing what needed to be done," Lawson replied, accepting the handshake. The sheriff turned to Willa. "Your father would be proud, Miss Reed. He was a good man who stood by his principles. You're cut from the same cloth." "Thank you, Sheriff," Willa said, touched by his words. "That means more than you know." As spring blossomed across the Wyoming landscape, Lawson and Willa began building their new home on the land he had described. It was beautiful country, with sweeping views of the mountains and fertile soil perfect for farming and raising horses. They were married in a simple ceremony in Shoshone, with Sheriff Wilkins giving the bride away and many of the townspeople attending to witness the union of two people whose courage had freed them from Caldwell's shadow. The cabin they built was larger than Lawson's previous one, with plenty of room for a family they both hoped would come. Willa planted a garden like her mother's, finding healing in the familiar rhythm of nurturing growing things. Lawson began breeding and training horses, his natural affinity for the animals attracting buyers from across the territory. At night, they would sit on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. Sometimes they spoke of the past of the families they had lost, the memories they cherished, the justice they had sought and found. But increasingly, their conversations turned to the future, their hopes, their dreams, the life they were building together. One evening, as summer faded toward autumn, Willa joined Lawson on the porch with news she had suspected for weeks. "Lawson," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby." His face transformed with wonder and joy as he understood her meaning. "A baby, you're certain?" She nodded, her own happiness reflected in his eyes. "In the spring, a new life, a new beginning." Lawson gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you, Willa Drake," he whispered against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, feeling truly at peace for the first time since that terrible night when she had stood watching her family's home burn. The child, a son they named Jonathan after Willa's father, was born the following May, a sturdy boy with Lawson's blue eyes and Willa's determined spirit. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth, named for Lawson's first wife in a gesture of healing and remembrance that brought tears to his eyes. Their home grew along with their family. A larger house replaced the original cabin, though they kept it standing as a reminder of where they had begun. Their horse breeding operation flourished, with Lawson's reputation for quality animals spreading throughout the West. Willa's garden expanded into a productive farm that supplied not only their family but many in Shoshone as well. They never forgot the past, how could they, when it had shaped them so profoundly. On the anniversary of the fire that had claimed Willa's family, they would visit the site where the Reed farmhouse had stood, now marked with a simple stone memorial. On the day that commemorated the loss of Lawson's first family, they would ride into the mountains, finding solace in the majestic landscape and each other's company. But these observances of grief became balanced, then outweighed by celebrations of joy birthdays, anniversaries, the milestones of their children's lives. The sorrow that had once defined them became just one thread in the rich tapestry of their shared life. As the years passed and the frontier gradually yielded to civilization, Lawson and Willa remained constants in a changing world. Their home became known as a place of welcome and warmth, their marriage an example of the strength that could come from shared adversity, overcome together. On their 20th anniversary, with their children nearly grown and the century drawing to a close, they sat on the porch of their home, hands entwined as they had been countless times before. "Did you ever imagine we would find this?" Willa asked, gesturing to the thriving homestead around them, the evidence of a life well lived. "When we were hunting Caldwell, seeking justice, did you think we'd end up here?" Lawson considered her question, his face lined now with years but still handsome, still quick to smile at the sight of her. "I hoped," he said finally. "From the moment I met you, I hoped for something like this, but I never dared believe it would be so complete, so perfect." "Not perfect," Willa corrected gently. "We've had our struggles, our disagreements. Perfect for us," he amended, bringing her hand to his lips. "Built on truth and justice, sustained by love and forgiveness. I wouldn't change a moment of it, not even the painful parts. They all led us here." As the sun set over the land they had nurtured together, casting long shadows across the fields where their horses grazed and their children had played, Willa rested her head on her husband's shoulder. From the deepest tragedy had come the greatest blessing this man, this family, this life they had created. Justice had been necessary, a foundation upon which to build. But it was love that had transformed them both, healing wounds that once seemed unhealable, creating something beautiful and enduring from the ashes of despair. In the gentle evening breeze, Willa could almost hear her mother's voice. "Love is the only thing that truly endures, the only force stronger than even the greatest pain." She had found that truth in the arms of Lawson Drake, and in the life they had built together a testament to the resilience of the human heart and its capacity for renewal, even after the darkest night.